Hey folks, I'm going to give it a minute or two for people to get joined in.
So I have to break out earlier than I expected to. So in the interest of selfishness, do you mind if I rejig the schedule a little bit?
Go for it.
Okay, cool.
So we are a minute or so past, and I know that Steve and Augustus needs to leave early, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is the January 15th, 2019 SIG release meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and we'll post it to YouTube just after the meeting. We ask that everybody please adhere to the project code of conduct and be good people. Stephen, do you want to drive things at first to make sure the stuff that you wanted to get covered gets covered quickly?
I think what's up there is relevant. I think the first thing we should take care of is that proposed fix to the 110
Yep.
branch. And
Yeah, Jordan, do you want to bring folks up to speed who haven't seen yet?
Sure. Excuse me, I get all choked up talking about this. No. Over the past 3 weeks, Dems and I had been tracking down a flake that was pretty persistent. Was seen across multiple release branches, and Dems root caused it to a regression that came in as part of some fix-up of panic handling in the API server. That panic handling fix got picked all the way back to release 110. And so this regression is present in the 110, 111, 112, and 113 branches. And so the fix was well understood. It was tiny. It was able to be proven out. It is picked back all the way to 111, and the question is what to do with 110, because the regression was introduced into the last patch release, the last planned patch release of 110. And so shortly, the CI for 110 would be dismantled. And once that happened, there's kind of no going back. Getting the processes spun back up to validate 110 releases would be prohibitive. But we have the option to use the CI that is still in place. All the CI is still in place and is green, and make a single commit release to fix this regression. The open question for sig-release is, do we want to make an exception to our 3-release support policy, given the consideration that we have CI still in place that hasn't been dismantled yet? This is fixing a regression that was introduced to 110. It's not taking a new feature or a new bug fix and backporting it. That's the open question.
So I'm in favor of picking it back. It sounds like it's small and contained, and you know what the fix is. I think we should do it while we still have the ability to do it. I think most of the people who were on the thread are in favor of it as well, but I'll not speak for anyone else and let everybody else shout out.
I feel like also we at least used to have a document that said 3 releases, 9 months-ish, depending on availability of volunteers to maintain things. Like I don't know how strictly formally it's been 3 precisely anyway.
Yeah, I think the concern was we have already been kind of kicking proposed changes to 110 out, like between December and now, saying, nope, that was the last release. To be fair, all of the changes I'm aware of that were being proposed for 110 did not fit these criteria. They were new things, new bug fixes and things. But that was the concern.
Yeah, so I think a regression qualifies as consideration. I think we also mentioned somewhere in our documentation about the criticality of the fix and kind of like the impact of it. So I think that regressions definitely qualify there.
That said, we also don't do things like go back and put in security fixes for releases we're no longer maintaining. And we do have to actually have a cutoff point at some point. I also agree, I think we should do this one, but I think we should avoid leaving an opening where people are going to want to like argue this a lot in the future.
Yeah, I'm in favor as well. I think if CI had already been dismantled, it would probably be too late. This probably wouldn't be worth resetting up all of those processes for that. But we have the benefit of it. I would like to take advantage of it in this case.
So just to Ben's point, I know, Jordan, you've been wrangling like a Herculean effort around making sure that people know what we should and shouldn't be doing and with regards to support versions and different things like that. Can we have someone that's tasked with making sure that it's very explicit in our documentation that we won't be doing this moving forward and that this is a exception case?
I think if you document the normal case and make a comment on this rather than like calling this case out in the normal documentation,
yeah,
that might be better.
I think if we're calling an exception case, then we're just going to want more exceptions.
Yeah. All right, I can summarize this discussion in the pull request itself. And yeah, anyone else who wants to add clarifications or chime in as well, feel free to.
Sounds good.
I also want to suggest real quick that we might maybe include the timeline for which we are spinning down all of this stuff as part of how we would be deciding this going forward. Like maybe if a patch is critical enough and it's before we've shut down everything, then we're going to accept it.
Or we may.
Accept
right.
it. Yeah.
May accept it. Because we do have somewhat of a hard timeline for that is not immediately 3 releases. It is a little bit of a fudge window as we're getting into the next release already. We might be able to just kind of tie it into that.
So 2 things I want to make sure we cover. Is there anyone on the line who thinks this is a bad idea or has some concern? Just want to make sure that people have the opportunity to speak up. Okay, not hearing anything. Then Patrick had a question in the chat about conformance and the number of versions or skew there.
Yeah, it's just about keeping consistency with the number of versions that we have CI and that we're able to issue patch releases from. Because I think at one point they were only at 2 releases, and I believe they were going to change to 3. So is this consistent with that expectation?
So we have CI for 3 releases. We actually have it for 3 and change. Once a release goes to N-4, that's when it is eligible to be dismantled, but it hadn't yet. We just started 114. So we have CI for 3 releases at minimum currently.
We actually basically always have for 4. It's just it alternates between the 4th one being an ongoing release and an old release.
I believe the change that was made for conformance was to allow the cutoff window for when you could declare yourself a conformant cluster on 110 was extended from 2 to 3 or something like that. Like so, the historical window was extended slightly. It shouldn't be
okay.
This. I'm not familiar with. Yeah,
but their window is still the same or smaller than this. So, such if someone said, "Hey, I've got a legitimate regression blocking conformance," then we can respond. So, if we're at 3 releases and change, I think we're fine. So,
just for some additional context, I know that we now have it locked into the release schedule to tear down all of the CI and related jobs and dashboards for the release, which just went out of the support window. But we don't do that until, I want to say, the 5th week of the release lifecycle. So that's just the arbitrary precedent that was chosen to tie it to like a week before we cut a branch for the new release and do the dashboard dance. We delete the old jobs to make room in our quota or whatever for the next set of jobs.
Okay. One other point I wanted to call out, and I'm not sure where the best place to put this is, but as we are preparing to cut the final patch release in a branch, we probably want to look very carefully at the changes that come in. I can say this because I was the one that actually picked this back, so it's on me. This was my bug that I wrote. But knowing that we don't have another patch release coming where we can fix a regression, or we should not expect to have one, the number and size of changes that should go into the last patch release should be very small and very closely inspected. So I'm not sure where, if that goes in the patch manager handbook, like things to be aware of, things to get more cautious about. So
that'd be a good add to the patch release manager handbook, I think, yeah.
I think it needs to be in an even more visible place that is not the handbook specifically. The handbook can link out to this place, but the place needs to be discoverable for people who are not patch managers, who are not branch managers, so that everyone can be aware of it. So whether that is, I guess, the root of sig-release or the root of the release team repo or something, or maybe community, but it can't be buried in a handbook.
I actually, I am very conflicted. I actually would love to see us do this fix, but I also feel that we do have a policy and we are pushing the boundaries in a way that maybe negates some of the virtue of the policy. Like, we have a policy, and whether or not I agree with it, I feel like we should stick to it as much as I would like to see us extend that policy or soften that policy. And I feel like it's going to be hard. It sets a precedent that I think this is what Ben was getting at. It sets a precedent that is hard to, that sets us up for tougher decisions in future when we have a security vulnerability, for example.
So maybe part of the policy can be that we should have a discussion like this amongst the SIG to determine if something is kind of on the boundaries that we should assess in person.
I think using a security issue is the exact thing that you should evaluate this against, and I agree that that's tricky.
Or like one where people are more likely to maybe not necessarily want it. It's like, say the Google Cloud provider has some bug in 110 and Google Cloud wants to patch the release after it's supposed to be out of support. And then we're probably going to want to say no, but we're allowing patches in.
Like, we keep the jobs around kind of as a nicety, acknowledging as an open secret that nobody ever seems to upgrade to the latest and greatest version of Kubernetes until there is at least a .1 around. So that's at least 2 weeks since the release. And then if you throw on another 2 weeks for, I don't know, just being nice or whatever, I do have concerns about the precedent that it sets. I'm okay being pragmatic and suggesting that it's this really squishy sliding window that actually turns into we'll cut 4 versions back, but only within the first 6 weeks of the release lifecycle of the current in development version. But that seems a lot tougher to summarize. And I feel like Jordan spent so much time wording the support policy really explicitly in the document that he put out as part of 113. I do kind of like the idea of keeping things simple.
But does that document read directly on this?
There's actually very little wording about that. It's mentioned. It's the Kubernetes project maintains release branches for the most recent 3 minor releases. Minor releases occur approximately every 3 months, so each minor release branch is maintained for approximately 9 months. That is the sum total of the policy.
as an alternate suggestion, we could put this in since it is actually a +2 -2 effectual patch. Get this release cut and move on and come back to locking in the policy tighter for the future. And just acknowledge that we don't have enough for it now.
It will absolutely set the precedence that if you did it for this tiny little patch, you should absolutely do it for a security vulnerability.
I think being clear about the reasons would be helpful. So if CI is still in place, if it is fixing something that was a regression, introduced as a regression in a patch release. So not a problem original to the release. So someone was fine on a previous patch release in that release branch. They upgraded and they encountered this bug. And the size of the fix and risk of the fix is negligible. Those three, to me, seem, if all three of those things are true, I would be inclined to accept a fix. And the one where it is the CI is still in place, like we don't want to maintain these indefinitely. And so once we no longer have the ability to do that, someone trying to get picks back to old releases is impractical. And the basic premise is we want each release branch to get no worse and continue getting better. And by introducing a regression, we have made that release branch worse than it was in this dimension.
So I think that we can also use having the CI branches available as a forcing function. If we're stricter about the teardown of the CI branches and when that happens, and the schedule is visible to the public, then we can back out and say, hey, like, well, we don't even have the CI to do this right now. So sorry.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that the CI branches were kept in for like kind of arbitrary reasons, and this could be like a weird contortion.
So I think pinning it to a CI and the introduction in a patch, so saying it doesn't exist on the release we cut, we introduced this in a patch. And so those two specific requirements completely shuts the door on any future discussion of a security vulnerability that wasn't introduced, in a patch, I guess. And I would argue that if we had CI and that the ability to patch a security issue that happened to be introduced in a patch, then we should do that, and it would follow this precedent as well.
We should write this down, though.
Yeah, I think that the only way this becomes precedent is if we don't clarify an established policy. So I was just going through the patch release manager as I'd done the 113.2 release and did a big update to it. But one of the things that surprised me is we actually give guidance to the patch release manager that they can accept features, that there's historical precedent for it, if it's just for, say, a cloud provider. So going back to your example, Ben, of there's a cloud provider issue that needs some fixing up. So we formally document that that's a potentially acceptable thing to do.
Yeah, just like the steering committee is supposed to sign off on every release before it goes out the door.
You can see me smirking, yes.
Right. It is also, that's also, I believe, just talking about patches, which is sort of separate from like an additional patch.
So whatever, pragmatically speaking, we still haven't even cut the patch release of the latest, like 13.1 hasn't gone out the door, right? So I'm comfortable tying to like that as a life cycle. I want to be pragmatic here. I don't want to just continue pontificating over my paranoia. Justin, how do you feel about precedent?
I think we can set. I like the idea of documenting the guidelines, and I thought Jordan's criteria were sufficiently like narrowing such that we are okay. I worry that I think we really I don't know if we want to go further but yes, I think that's fine.
So I think we're all kind of saying the same stuff. We need to, right now the documentation is not sufficient. We don't have sufficient criteria to specifically say whether or not something gets in or gets out. We need to document it. I think we have enough information to document it at this point. And someone who wants to put up a PR can totally do that. But I think we should move on.
Where should the documentation live, and then I'm happy to move on.
Somewhere in sig-release, if we can discuss it on a PR or on the channel.
All right, so the decision is to move forward with the PR and a new cut. Is that correct?
Yes.
Consensus? All right. So the next section on the agenda is labeled SPIFXP. Subprojects.
Do you mind if I cut in real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. So just release team related things or things that I've had on my plate. The Shadows questionnaire is out. It's live. It's going to be up until I want to say the end of Thursday Eastern time, so that we have enough time to get the full survey results over to the current release 114 release team. We're getting lots of lots of responses. So I want to get an early version of that out to the release team as well. I'm going to be working on that tonight. Since tweeting it, I think our responses have almost doubled, and that's probably still going. So I think cutting it off soon is probably a good idea. There have been discussions across multiple SIGs at this point: SIG architecture, SIG PM, SIG apps, and a few others around. KEPs are going to be mandatory for this release cycle. Aaron is, as he quoted, a bull in a china shop about getting this done. I am totally on board. So we're going to be working on making sure that the documentation is up to snuff to allow people to do that. And KEPs that are in implementable states are the ones that will be accepted. Outside of that, I think yeah, okay, all right, sub-projects. That's the quick update on my side.
Cool. Hi, I'm the bull. So in this particular China shop, I've been sort of iterating more and more over the issues that are in the sig-release repo, because that's where I'm trying to keep track of what the 114 release team is doing. So I'm using a milestone. I'm kind of feeling like it would be helpful if there were area labels that corresponded to some of the sub-projects that sig-release already seems to have in practice. And then I realized / remembered that we had a discussion about sub-projects back in October that I kind of wanted to maybe revisit. So the idea is based on like what exists today, what's called out in the sig-release community repo today in sigs.yaml, there are 4 sub-projects. There's Hypercube, because reasons. There's release team, because that's the bulk, I guess, of what we do. There's the publishing bot, because I asked that the publishing bot not belong to SIG testing, and SIG release volunteered to accept it, and the sub-project owners agreed that SIG release was the best home. And then SIG release the repo, which is like all of your documents and administrivia. I'm kind of proposing, number one, that there be area labels that match these sub-projects that can be applied to the appropriate repos, so we can see like what work is ongoing for those sub-projects. You can use owners files with a labels field to automatically apply these labels to PRs, so we can see like what are all of the PRs that have to do with Hypercube. And if people are opening up issues related to Hypercube, we could tag that as area Hypercube. And then the other thought is, I think we're kind of well overdue for a release engineering sub-project. And that was one of the sub-projects that was proposed by us back in October, because the release team is super busy and dedicated to shepherding and stewarding all of the bits into the right place, but there's definitely a lot of machinery around actually cutting a release. And there is an interest, I think, in trying to identify all of the areas that can be de-Googlified, such that one day maybe a non-Googler can be involved in every single part of the process. I also raised this project up because there is interest from members of the community to step up and contribute to automatically cutting Debian and RPM packages for each release that we publish. This came up during the LTS working group discussion at the KubeCon summit, where I got to jump up and down and say, yay, we publish alphas and betas every 2 weeks. But for people who stand up Kubernetes with the kubeadm tool, no, we don't, because they don't consume raw bits. They consume a package. So there's like the group of people who are motivated to solve that problem and like make Kubernetes the canonical location of the artifacts that describe how to build these packages. That to me feels like a subproject called the release engineering subproject that falls under sig-release. So if I take a look at the current set of owners files that describe the release team subproject, I feel like splitting that up in two such that the owners files in the release repo corresponds to the release engineering team or the release engineering subproject, and the owners files in the release team subdirectory of the sig-release repo corresponds to the release team subproject.
Yeah,
just one other thing, and then one further thing is I'd like for us to start thinking about how the owners of those subprojects are distinct or separate from the sig-release chairs, so that we can start to like grow people into these ownership roles. And so what I had proposed was like make the current release team person and the last current release team lead, maybe the last 4 release team leads, and some people who are or make the current release team lead and some people who care about stewarding the release team process as a whole, the owners of that subproject, and do the same thing for the release engineering subproject, but include the people who actually have to cut bits and have credentials. Okay, now I'm done.
Okay, so yeah, I totally agree with everything Aaron said. I think that the release engineering subproject is long overdue. I think we've mentioned it quite a few times on the SIG release meetings, and what we need is so I believe Tim and Alexandra are already kind of working on I think I might have seen a PR today around the bits and pieces around for branch management and patch release management for the release team. I see the release engineering subproject as having multiple roles. Some people who sit as branch managers or patch release managers who can exist and kind of touch bits for all of the releases. So it's not just on a singular person to be responsible for those kinds of things. That's kind of the reason that the patch release management team as a team has started standing up. So that team, but the patch release management team and the branch managers would sit kind of in between release engineering and the release team, right? They'd have a role on the release team, but also be part of the release engineering subproject. So there's lots of interest for this. I think that we need documentation. That's the next step. I know that Tim is already working on that stuff. I know that there's a bunch of interest on polling at least Red Hatters and polling VMware people and people who have DM'd me. So I want to get this started. I want this to be up for February, if that sounds cool with everyone.
So are we talking about a project that just kind of like, not just, but runs the bits, or are we finally getting a project for maintaining all of the actual like tooling?
Can publish the bits, can maintain the tooling, right? So I imagine that everything that's in K-release, the things that are release tooling that is in KK right now, the publishing bot and Hypercube could probably be rolled under that stuff too.
Okay, well, I would actually probably suggest that those teams are going to be staffed by fairly different people. Like, for example, pulling in the past 4 release leads, I think most of the release leads are not going to be like actively hacking on, say, an Anago versus maybe helping to just kind of push the releases out the door and so forth.
Oh, for sure. I don't imagine that anyone has to hold any one role or all of the roles. It's just the sooner we get the subproject formally stood up, the sooner people can actually decide what those roles are and how to go about it.
Right. Well, the point I'm trying to drive towards is like getting some single points of contact or single owners to start shepherding these efforts forward, rather than Stephen having to talk about each and every one of these things so copiously, but quite well. So that's why Sumi's attending. sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, man, but he's cut the Debians for a number of the releases of Kubernetes as a Googler, and would be interested in identifying what are the things that we can, do to hand this over to the community. What's the work that needs to be done, and then can we drive that work to done? And so I'm looking for people to kind of do that and to call that the release engineering effort.
I'm very much interested in getting that process out of Google's hand and giving it to community, because I think that's one step where the patch releases managers have to reach out to Googler to ask for generating the Debians and RPMs. And since I've done this the last few times, I feel the pain of the patch release manager. So it'll be good to have that with the community as opposed to the Googler.
So so for everyone that's on the call and everyone who might be viewing the call later, can we take it as an action item for all of us to kind of reach in internally and talk to some of the people who have experience doing release engineering work and see if they would be interested in this kind of effort?
That's totally fine. What I would like to do to get the ball rolling, though, is to call these things distinct subprojects and call out to the owner's files, as I have proposed in the document here. So I'll open up a pull request. This is just my sanity check that those things that I proposed are sane, because to follow on from that, there were 2 other subprojects, I think, that Stephen brought up when I mentioned this. Licensing is definitely one of them. I forget if I missed the other one. Should I go ahead and add those as subprojects? And if so, what's the owner's file I should point to?
Yeah, so licensing, I mentioned over here, so I usually take point on the licensing things, as you said. But the licensing is myself, Nikita, and Steve Winslow from the Linux Foundation. Let's see. I think the existing owners are at least fine as is right now, if those projects are actually active.
What is the owner's file that corresponds to the licensing stuff?
There is not an owner's file for that yet, so I can put one together.
Well, so I'm volunteering to put that out as part of a pull request. I'm just sort of trying to figure out where it should go. So
okay, so I added leads here. I'm highlighting it on the sheet right now.
Okay.
So what I'm imagining for each of the subprojects is that we just have a subdirectory within sig-release, unless they have their own repo.
Okay.
Right. So the way that release team already has their own subdirectory, we would continue moving forward like that with release engineering and licensing. And I think PST has their own repo. I know they're not a subproject. I don't know what they are. We should probably help define that too.
Okay.
But now I'm just unraveling the onion.
So the other 2 things that had been brought up back in October, so there was LTS, but that's been spun up as a working group, so I don't think we need to talk about that.
But it is spinning.
It's so very close. And there's something else that says security/threat model/provenance. Now that one, I'm not sure. We do have a security audit working group that was spun up, but I think that's for the fixed scope, fixed time, fixed scope effort of doing a security audit on Kubernetes. There's also the product security team.
Yeah,
there's a nexus of security related things, and then those tie into tooling and code as well, and how we build and release what we do for artifacts, and the security aspect of it. For example, signing in particular has been something that's requested but doesn't have a basis in security yet.
So I don't know if that is a thing where a dedicated group of people want to get together and push that forward, or if that's tangled up with some other stuff and we shouldn't worry about it right now. Because one thought I had looking through all of the issues in sig-release is there were a number of issues created as follow-up items from a retrospective on the latest CVE exploit on how we could make things smoother. And I'd love to tag all of those with area security or area product security team or something. But I don't know if I'm talking about a whole sub-project or what. So I'm just leaving the beat.
I think it's TBD. I would say leave that stuff for now. It's something that I want to push on. But also when it was coming up 8 months or so ago, PST was sort of 4 people's names as opposed to what's become a little bit more formalized and operational and growing as a broader team. So I don't know if at what point maybe that comes under their purview, but still from the tooling and release perspective, we're always going to have something that I think is desired on our part, but it's still a bit TBD.
Yeah, so I don't think that it may be specifically an ask here, but the PST, I don't know like what the governance structure is. It essentially exists outside of the Kubernetes governance model, right? So like they have their documentation in sig-release, but I don't know who is supposed to own them or if they have ownership.
They do. It is a bit of a TBD. Like I see Jordan here if he wants to talk to it, but I also think it's fair if that's something that we discuss offline and put on the steering committee's plate to like decide how to formalize that structure.
Yeah, I'm happy to punt on it because I know I don't own it.
I heard my name. What was the question?
What
Was there a question?
like what? So what is the product security team? Should it be considered a sub-project of sig-release? Is it its own entity that is distinct from a SIG and a working group? Is it a committee?
I think it's a committee. I think Brandon was trying to formalize it.
The
Okay.
PST also crosses things that are not the core project, right? Like technically they're the contact point to then reach out to other, say like SIG subprojects and things.
I'm not sure, but I'll accept it's a committee and take it offline from there.
Yeah, same as.
I think one of the issues I've had with understanding them is that they are a incident response team and therefore are privileged in some ways, and it's not open. It is the one thing of Kubernetes that is not open, but there are other things that come under the security umbrella, which are, are certain things a good idea from a security point of view. And there is, as far as I know, no great forum for that. SIG-Auth has graciously accepted some of that mantle, but it does feel like there is a gap there and two roles which are both currently being filled by the same group, but one of which
to be clear, the product security team does not do security audits.
Right. So that's that. I think to Justin's point, like there's a working group that's going to do a security audit, and there's the incident response team that is the product security team. But like, where is the group of people who care about all things security related? Is that a sub-project of sig-release? Should that be its own SIG? Should that be another working group? I don't know, and I'm okay tabling that. But I agree, it's an unknown.
Okay, let's roll. Let's roll on that. So I have to pop off in a bit, so I'm sorry about that. But my thoughts, at least for the subprojects, are for the things of organization that kind of fit under sig-release. So we've got LTS. It's a working group. We are going to spin up release engineering in the super near term, and I believe and I think that each of the projects that handle, or the subprojects currently that handle bits, like Hypercube, Publishing Bot, all that stuff should roll under release engineering, just to make that super simple. And then licensing in the release team, right? So release team is kind of well formed at this point, and we have owners and we have documentation and all that good stuff. Licensing is one of the outliers, which I'll take that on. Sorry, I have to blast. Love y'all. Later.
All right. Anything anybody else wants to close off there on that topic?
It does sound like a good idea to have some group for this. I don't know if there's actual staffing yet, or who would know.
Yeah, for a long time, that's been part of the conversation. I believe if we put some, there's a chicken and egg here, right? If you have very little documented, nobody knows what they're volunteering for. But if you put too much time into documenting too much, it's premature optimization, and maybe the volunteers don't show up either. So I think we've got to do something versus nothing, and then see where some of these go. And as opposed to formalizing every single thing as its big own well-documented thing, kind of pragmatically saying, here's a couple buckets, let's get them going, like the release engineering being an obvious one. I think that's beneficial.
Yeah, as someone who's struggled in the past to get some tooling changes approved to the Kubernetes/release repo, or reviewed rather, I would for sure be happy to participate in any release engineering efforts. So count me as a +1 on that for sure.
And Steve Greenberg, who's on the call for the first time today, I think today also is somebody who popped up at KubeCon in Seattle and similarly interested in doing some support there. Okay, I'm gonna move on. The next thing on the agenda is just an FYI. We are on the Thursday community meeting calendar for a SIG update on January 31st. That's 2 weeks out, but if there are things that folks feel should be brought up there, let myself, Stephen, and Caleb know. We'll make sure they get covered. Some of the stuff that we've just talked about, I think will be good to bring up there, the sub-projects. I want to shift what's on here just slightly. What do we have? Do I want to? We're nearing the end of our time slot, and we've pushed part 3 of the release retrospective and pushed it, and there's like 3 or 4 bullets there. Do folks want to discuss them formally right now and call it done, or what if people think?
So I would like to discuss the container image promoter quickly, if possible, and not push it back.
It's like nobody's jumping up and down to talk about the retro. So
okay, we can kick that a little further. So, Linus.
Yes. So hi.
Let's have you go next.
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Linus Arber. I'm a release engineer at Google. So basically, I added to the agenda a link to the KEP that discusses the image promotion process that will hopefully kind of like take over the current process, which is, to my understanding, some special Googlers push stuff to kates.gcr.io. So it's kind of like hidden behind this Google wall. And my hope is that that wall gets, abandoned so that we have some sort of open process around how images become, like knighted or promoted to be official images. So like that should all happen, in the open, right? Like there's no reason why we have this thing that happens behind Google's, hush doors at Google. So the KEP has the overall idea. I just submitted and got approved this tool called the Container Image Promoter, which is a small piece of that overall plan. Hopefully there will be a demo of it working, like I said, this quarter in the update to the GitHub issue tracker around this KEP, but hopefully sooner than that. Yeah, so that's my update. What I want to know from this meeting, or why am I talking about it here, is I just want to know if there's like any strong opinions about, is this a bad idea or something, or is there like strong pushback from anybody? Because like I would like to know, because I've only heard like people, at least at Google, saying, yeah, that's a great idea, like, but I just want to like double check, and see what other people think outside of Google. So yeah, that's my spiel. Does anybody have any comments? Does anybody have any questions?
I think, one question that came up in the context of the Kates Infra Working Group was whether or not we were trying to advocate for everybody to use like a blessed GCR repo, or whether we were thinking of a model where people could push their container images wherever is convenient for them, and then we use our tool to pull down from that, or whether we're talking about something like, for all of the SIG sponsored projects, we would be taking on the onus of creating a GCR repo for them, or something to that effect. So I wasn't sure where that lines up with your proposal. I apologize, I actually haven't read it, but yeah.
That's a really good question, but I honestly have not thought of it to that degree or to that extent. So
okay, because
So-
looking at the diagram, it seems like your proposal would advocate that we as a project create a blessed staging repo that we share credentials to the people within SIGs who
Right.
want to create their artifacts.
Right. So yeah,
I would still suggest that like we want to sync things a little bit differently. Like you probably want like official core images to be hosted a little bit differently from like SIG's totally random project for other reasons. Or like even like mirroring or things like I'd probably want a registry that's Kubernetes, not a million other things.
I mean, there's
I think this is a totally separate discussion from whether or not we're okay with Linus's tool and model, though. And I will add that we're using it today, and I think it works really well. And I would be really happy to see this in open source instead of some mystical internal process that we're running.
So just to make sure I'm not conflating scope here, this is really about container images just for the Kubernetes project, not for any of the sub-projects that we support.
I guess. Yeah.
Today we use this for core images and add-ons.
Okay.
That was going to be my question. Something I think that might make sense initially in the KEP to add to give some example of container images that are expected to go through this, and if there are ones that are not, to explicitly call them as out of scope.
Okay.
I'm fine proceeding with this, with calling that other stuff out of scope, and we can figure out how to revisit that later. It was just, yeah, because I've seen a number of asks from like cluster API provider projects or cloud provider projects. They're like, we have images that we want to build and push someplace. Do you have that thing? It's unclear. No, we kind of don't. So just trying to figure out what we can leverage to help with that. And I think it's too early to use this for that.
But in the meantime, it's definitely a positive incremental change with respect to where we are today on the build release pipeline, for sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's all I have.
I would say I seriously think that this is a really, really, really good process that we should use for all those other things, but we should figure that out after we get it out and running for the core images. And we have that today, and that's really nice, but it's not nice because it's super internal and it has to be approved super internally and it's not transparent. And this is what's controlling what's actually in the primary official registry today is the non-open source variant of this design, more or less.
I don't have anything to add. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that.
You're welcome.
So, Josh, you're next up then on cleaning up blocking test boards.
Yeah, so Aaron came up with a bunch of criteria for what should be blocking as opposed to non-blocking. Trying to implement that now in SIG master blocking, something I wanted to do while I was CI signal lead, but turned out to be difficult to do well on the release team. So I'm trying to get it done now. I just wanted to alert people that activity was going on there, and that it might affect a bunch of people in case people have opinions on what should be in that testing. As Aaron pointed out, the sig-release test script is used primarily by the current release team. It's not used exclusively by the current release team. So I'm particularly wondering about things that are not release team tests here. One thing I'll note, Justin, I sent you a question on Slack about one particular job. And otherwise, that discussion will go on, and that PR and its various related issues, etc. And then hopefully we'll get this cleaned up for the next stage of cleanup this week.
I will take a look at my Slack, sorry.
Oh, I just sent it to you today.
So one thing I want to add on that is The argument I was making is like sig-release has a number of dashboards under its group. Many of them are of the form sig-release, branch, adjective. Those are all dashboards the release team is interested in. But I just talked about a whole bunch of other sub-projects we might want to do, like all of the tools in Kubernetes release. I wonder if those have any unit tests. Can you even unit test Bash? Anyway, like maybe those need their own dashboard. And so there is a sig-release MISC dashboard where a couple of things show up now. And I was just suggesting like maybe we keep that around for those until they merit their own dashboard. One other release blocking criteria is that all jobs should have owners, and those owners should get alerted when those jobs fail continuously. And we want to signify this by having email addresses used in the test grid config so that people will actually get email. Preferably those email addresses will belong to Google groups so they're publicly visible and auditable and more than a single person gets spammed. As I've started digging into this, one of my concerns is that a lot of jobs fit one of two patterns. One is they are build jobs, and it's kind of unclear to me. Unfortunately, it seems like the people who have the most expertise on those build jobs live in SIG testing, not SIG release, even though to me the building of bits kind of belongs to SIG release. The second thing is there are a lot of jobs that are like umbrella related jobs that run like all the E2E tests. So like just the GCE E2E job, for example, or what about the slow job, or what about the serial job, or what about the flaky job? Those all run jobs from a number of different SIGs. It seems kind of arbitrary to assign any one SIG to own that, but I still kind of do want to assign one SIG to be the point of contact to then like go figure out which SIG owns the test that they should go bug. So my proposal would be if those jobs live on the SIG release dashboards, that it's SIG release's responsibility to go bug people to keep those jobs green. For those jobs that don't clearly belong to like a single feature that's owned by a single SIG or something, I'm kind of proposing the umbrella of build-related jobs go off to SIG testing, unless y'all tell me we should make them go to SIG release and have the build people watch that. And I'm suggesting the umbrella test jobs like integration testing, E2E testing, that's just really vague and not feature specific, should also go to SIG release and be delegated off accordingly. What do you think?
If for the SIG infra people, you mean like, say, Jeff or James or something, I think they're about as active in either SIG. And to me, as much as they might be a bit more active in SIG testing, I do think that like build is owned by release, but that might be a separate question of what even is SIG testing.
Yeah.
Maybe the release engineering team sort of starts to coalesce those people into a place that's not just SIG testing or just SIG release. We'll see.
Yeah. Like I'm happy to do some weird like voluntold type stuff where we create some placeholder Google groups for this stuff, and then I hand it to you to staff with the right people or something. My goal is just to make sure that somebody gets notified when these jobs break. So like we could say, gee, that sounds an awful lot like CI Signal's responsibility. And so we put Maria's email address and all the test grid things. No, I think that's maybe not ideal, but it could be like Maria and the CI Signal shadows get subscribed to a Google group that represents the CI Signal role for this release, and that's who gets notified or something. Like I'm happy to brainstorm this on a PR too, but I just wanted to ask people's opinion in this high bandwidth medium too.
Ownership is key. I like the idea of group as opposed to on the shoulders of person, but it also still has to be actively owned. It can't be like, hey, somebody in the group is going to do it, having a lead-ish role time-boxed where somebody maybe for that period is setting up a filter so that they get a little more high priority interrupt on the things as opposed to a tragedy of the commons. I think that direction is useful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the thing is, if we're going to assign it to groups, do we have any way? Really, one of the problems that we've had with a lot of group email addresses or GitHub group aliases is that as far as I know, there's no centralized way to audit those. And so as a result, I find things, certainly when I was CI Signal and I was pestering people via a lot of the aliases for failures, I would find out that all of the people in a particular group had left the Kubernetes project.
It's worth GitHub groups are becoming a little bit more auditable, but that won't solve this problem because we can't email them.
Yeah, I'm treating GitHub groups as dev null. As GitHub notifications don't work for me, so why should I expect them to work for anybody else?
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that email works better, and I'm purely leaning on the fact that like TestGrid supports alerting to email, so I can have the bot, I can have automation start that conversation, and see where that goes. The thing here is this is like, maybe it conflates two things. One is like notifying people in like a written form, but the other thing is job ownership, so that I know like who to talk to. Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking down the line of, we want to assign job ownership to all this stuff. We want to assign groups as much as possible so that we can add and remove people from the groups. But then what are we going to be doing in a year when the groups have effectively bit rotted?
Yeah,
So
I think the biggest...
I was just going to say, one of the other advantages of using a public Google group is you can, like, we could start to act on, here's when the notification went out and when was it responded to. Not that I'm proposing any heavy-handedness about that now, but I am trying to think about like metrics that we can use for all of our release blocking criteria, including responsive to test failures.
Yeah, I spoke about this a lot at KubeCon with some people, including Aaron, and it's still kind of iffy, like how we could act on that. But if we use something like a group, you can go and look and say, okay, they got a notification this day, and here's 3 weeks later, and no one has touched it. We need to update this group, or the SIG isn't owning their stuff, or something. How we handle that maybe isn't solved yet, but it at least gets us to a point where we could eventually do something. Whereas today we can't even really point to like the SIG that owns these things.
Mm-hmm.
So all that said, Josh, really happy that you're taking this on. It's something I care deeply about, and as I get more bandwidth, you'll see more of my involvement there. I apologize if I get overly pushy. That's just my bull in the China shop that is TestGrid. Maria, I feel I kind of look more to you as the lead. I will defer to your opinion on things that make your life easier as the CI signal for this release.
Oh, is Maria on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to be submitting a new version of that PR, and I'll want you to check it off, obviously, before we merge it.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, quick thought on what you just talked about. Couple of things that popped to mind. Like first, a hard no on putting my email address as a contact. I'm joking. The second one, I mean, we can always, I guess, like go for an implementation and see how that works out and iterate from there. It doesn't have to be like whatever we end up going for now in terms of notifications. We can always measure just how successful it was and change it if it doesn't work out. But yeah, also quite happy that this is starting and very happy to support it.
Well, with that, we've run out of time and won't be doing the tail end of the retro. We will have to figure out how to make sure we finalize that.
I consider retro a very, very important part of the release process. I found us with about 30 minutes to spare at the end of the last release team meeting. So I'm happy to provide some room for that. If we need to do that at the next release team meeting. My continual ask here is the value of the retro is what we decide we will do differently as a result. And I'm a little worried that I'm the only person who's gone through and created action items. My name is on all of them. My name is not the only name on some of these. So I really appreciate those people who are helping out with some of the other things. But truly the most productive part of the retro is what did we learn and how can we do better as a result. So if there are things there that you feel strongly about, let's prioritize talking about that at the next release team meeting. And there's nothing stopping you from digging through this doc and opening up issues in the meantime.
Yes. All right, thanks folks. I will upload this to YouTube shortly. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your days.